Wilson, and I'm one of the founders of RE Technology, as well as one of the founding partners of Wave Group. So we do a ton of business, and I have a lot of interesting conversations in this area. But before we begin, I'd like to introduce our panelists. So if we could click through to the next slide, please. So let me introduce our panelists today. We have George Gerstenfeld. He's the Vice President and General Manager of the Global Real Estate Solutions Group for DocuSign, and has done a lot of interesting work on some of the things we're going to be talking about today. We also have Glenn Shimkus with us. He's the Vice President for DocuSign, and is, if some of you may remember him as one of the founders of Cartavy, which merged with DocuSign a few months ago. So he's got a great depth of understanding of what goes on with the productization of what goes on in this market. It's a very interesting place. So if we could go to the next slide, please. Okay, so what we're finding today is that in the 21st century is really all about data privacy and data control. There's a lot of concerns, especially with the larger brokers that we work with on a daily basis, that really want to be sure that their data is being protected. These are some of the largest and most important transactions that happen in consumers' lives, and they want to be sure that when they're working with their clients, that brokers are fully protecting them. So they really have some key questions like, do you know how and where and when your data is being used? They want to know, are the technology vendors that they're working with really committed to helping them protect that information in the way that makes sense? So are they being fully transparent about how and where the data is being stored? And once it's being entered into the system, what happens to it? Does it stay just in the folder and in the file that it's supposed to go to, or is it somehow being shared with other folks for marketing purposes or for other things that are not exactly with what they were trying to be, what they thought that the intention of it was. So it's a really key topic, and which is why we've invited DocuSign on today to help us understand better what's going on with it. So if we go to the next slide, and we can introduce George and Glenn, and they can take us through some really interesting things first about the xDTM standard, which is something that we probably most of us don't understand, but that they've really been leading, so we better understand what's about. And George, if you could go forward with that, that would be great. Thank you.
So Glenn is actually going to kick us off with this one, but
okay, great.
George, I'm going to I'll get Glenn, pass it off to him.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, and terrific. Yeah, so this is Glenn, and I'm responsible for product at DocuSign, as Marilyn already mentioned earlier. But xDTM is actually a standard that DocuSign has spearheaded, and it's really about helping companies that are living in the world of the cloud make sure that the right things are happening in terms of security, privacy, infrastructure. How do you scale these things? And it's something that we're working with companies across, quite frankly, across the globe on. We have folks at Microsoft, FedEx, Purdue, and some other universities, Hewlett-Packard, and the whole notion there is really to make sure that when you're working with products that live in the cloud, right, this nebulous thing, that there's some standards that you can expect. And fundamentally, it all starts with the data and how do you secure it and how do you protect it. And that's where DocuSign comes into play with this xDTM standard. And as we look at that, and we're working on making sure that our products are compliant, if you will, with that standard, and we're living up to what we are as a group kind of saying is important. And at the same time, DocuSign recently joined RISO, and as a part of that, I've joined the board of directors of RISO, and it's something that we're looking at as an industry as well in real estate. So it's a fun time to see so much happening in standardization, as well as people putting strategic importance on the value of that data and where it lives.
And this is George, just building on that a little bit. As Glenn mentioned, we've partnered with some of the biggest companies around the world that take security very seriously. He mentioned a few: HP, Microsoft, Visa is one of those companies as well. And a big piece for us in creating a standard is that something that we, of course, are going to adhere to the standard that we're helping create, but something that all companies out there know. These are the principles that are sort of the right way that data should be treated. And, security is something that I think a lot of people in real estate have taken for granted, or I've been to a lot of conferences, talked to a lot of people, and it's not the first thing that comes top of mind. But then all of a sudden you start talking about data ownership. Who has the right to your data, your listing data, your transaction data? And there's a lot of companies out there that'll give their service away for free in exchange for your data, that they can turn around and find a business model to monetize that data. And all of a sudden, people's ears typically perk up when you talk about that data ownership and the standards around that. So if we go to the next slide, we can talk a little bit about the, essentially we're seeing a lot of traction for this standard now. Forbes, Forrester, a lot of news news outlets have picked up that this standard is something that is a recognizable thing that becomes a thing that every company wants to adhere to and hold themselves accountable to. So next slide, please. And so when you start talking about, there's sort of this saying in the technology world, the wisdom of crowds. There's a great TED talk with a guy who asked the audience to predict. He brings an ox on the stage and asks the crowd to estimate the weight of the cow. And every time he does that presentation, they get it within 2 or 3 pounds of the correct weight. And so big data and the cloud are these sort of 2 really big concepts thrown around over the last few years. And there are real benefits and very important benefits that come from that. And there are also real pitfalls. So we don't want to just sort of fall into scaring people about the pitfalls, which are important and real, but some of the benefits, personalization algorithms. I'm personally a huge film consumer. I love watching Netflix or listening to music on Pandora. And these personalization algorithms are all around musical likings and musical taste that is my own data mixed with other people's data that have listened to similar music, and then all of a sudden recommends more movies and more music like that. And so there's a lot of recommendation tools for leads for brokers and agents, recommending agents to clients. There are a lot of smart tools out there that can help on the benefit side of big data. And the cloud, you can be anywhere, anytime, access your file on any device. If something goes wrong and your computer crashes, everybody's had a computer crash at one point or another, disaster recovery is much easier in the cloud. And at the same time, there's some really big pitfalls. I was just in Dublin at we have an office there, and our global security team is there. We've got people from eBay, PayPal, some of the biggest companies that sort of worry about hacking of credit card data. And the number one thing that they call out is people putting social security numbers or credit card numbers in an email. And email is about the least secure medium that people can use, and hackers get into the email, and then they start, you start getting into identity theft and a lot of privacy issues. And so at DocuSign, everything is behind an encrypted firewall. We never let anything sort of outside of the DocuSign universe. So everything that we send, there's no document sent back and forth. It's a link between 2 trusted users. Only those 2 users have the link and the key, and then can go back into that particular file that particular person is allowed to see. So, looking for companies that are transparent in how they share data, what they do data, who owns that data, and how that data is protected is really key.
Yeah, and
George,
I think
go ahead, Glenn.
Yeah, I was just going to follow up on what George said, and the reality is there's so many benefits to big data in the cloud, but we believe part of our job, and again, that goes back to the xDTM standard, but just in general, is to educate the marketplace, because that's what we do every day. The folks that we work with and have the privilege to work with in real estate, their job is managing transactions and selling properties and representing buyers and sellers. So we look at it and say, okay, part of this is our obligation to help educate that while there are benefits, there are things that you need to look out for, and some of that we mitigate hopefully as a vendor, but the key is to be having the conversations and identifying what those pitfalls are and to be mindful of them, because like anything else, there's of course benefits, but there's drawbacks, and as long as you understand what the shortcomings are and are able to mitigate them as much as possible, that's where you really get the bigger bang for your buck here, and that's what we're really focused on.
And just to bring home what these guys are talking about to a real case of something that we just saw happen recently, and why everything you're doing with the transaction should be done inside of a secure system like we're talking about. There was a group down in the Mid-Atlantic region, and somebody got into their email, as these guys were just talking about, and somebody was transmitting the place to send earnest money via an unsecure email. Somebody grabbed that through some nefarious person grabbed it, resent that email to the person that had been sent to and said, oh, don't send it to bank account blah, 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 send it to bank account blah, 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 and instead, and there was like several $100,000 that were stolen within, a few minutes before people started to figure out what was going on. So this is serious stuff. It's not like, you don't worry about, email that's about, regular kinds of daily tasks. But when you start to talk about dealing with somebody's livelihood and somebody's most important asset and thousands and sometimes millions of dollars that are transcending across, in different places. This is not something that you take lightly, and these guys don't take it lightly, which is why we thought it would be really helpful for you to hear from people that are not only, focused on it, but actually helping create some of these standards that can help all of us be protected. So this is stuff that isn't very sexy, frankly, compared to the selling things. But at the end of the day, this stuff could really get you in trouble, more so than lots of other things we talk about, through RE Technology and Wave Group. So maybe we can jump to the next. Go ahead.
Yep. I'm sorry. I was going to transition us too. So go ahead, Marilyn.
Okay. Yes. If you go to the next slide, I wanted to just kind of frame our conversation for today. As some of you may know, Wave Group is a consulting firm in the industry, and we work with a lot of larger brokers in the industry, lots of MLSs, technology companies, and as we've had lots of conversations and been participating in facilitating strategic plans over the last several months, there's been sort of 8 themes around protection data and privacy that have come up that I wanted to just quickly review with you guys, and then I'm going to let DocuSign take us through them in more depth. But the first one is one that's a hot topic for brokers everywhere, and that's to be sure that consumer and transaction data is being protected. That once data is being provided to one of us as agents or brokers, that it's only being used in the way that it was intended to be used, and that's not getting repurposed in ways that our clients never accepted or approved, and in ways that brokers or agents have never approved. The second thing is a key one, and one that every broker should be thinking about, and I know many of our brokers are very serious about this, is oversight and compliance when they're looking at transactions. The idea that they can look at every document to be sure that there's all the legal protections have been worked in, that the answers are correct, that there's a consistency of some things as simple as addresses and things like that across the board. This is really an important element for protecting a broker and their agents, and of course also their clients. The third one is data integration, and this is a bigger theme well beyond just protecting data and privacy, but we suffer from a lack of integration in our business, and to the degree that we can work with companies that understand how integration can be important and critical and can be really helpful to not only making our business more efficient but also more protected, that's another key element. And so better understanding what people do and who they integrate with is important. Access control and permission. So there's some things at broker level people want to see, and there's things that agents need to see. Any of these systems have to have the flexibility to be able to control that access so that the right people are seeing the right level of data, and that, again, it's doing the right things for the brokerage. Legal viability. We did a webinar, about a year ago, and if anybody has any interest, maybe we'll even send a link to it as part of the follow-up to this, that there's a lot of different ways to transact, either to do electronic signatures or to even do full document and transaction management online, some of which are very legally protecting the broker and some aren't. So that's an important element. Copyright. There's been a lot of press and a lot of hoopla, frankly, about this over the last couple of years, about who owns what copyright, how do you make sure that they're protected, and again, when thinking about purchasing these types of systems or evaluating the one you have, that's another element to look at. And then the last one, and again, one that's, it sounds like Glenn and both you and George have, your group gets way beyond even what we do in real estate on this, but security and identity theft, we know that's a huge problem. And that's something that's got to be worked into all of these systems. So we're going to kind of walk you through all of these. These are, again, the tenets that when I talk to brokers, these are the kinds of things that are worrying them about these systems, and not even worrying them, but the challenges that they want to address and be sure that whatever system they choose, that they truly are addressing all of these. So with that, I'm going to go to the next slide, and then I'm going to let you guys kind of talk us through those, and I'll jump in when I see something that I've heard from brokers as well.
Yeah, and fundamentally, I mean, especially when we're talking about protecting consumer and transaction data here, is when you really think about it, during a real estate transaction, that buyer, that seller, is really exposed in terms of their data. And so many different people touch that data that's really a blueprint, a digital blueprint of who they are, and it's touched by so many different people across so many different organizations. It truly is when that consumer is most exposed in their digital life. And so, for us, it's our job to help protect, and we want to make sure we're offering tools to the industry that help protect during this really high emotion point in time, high stress point in time, and that's not just for the buyer seller, it's for everyone that touches that transaction. So, when we look at it, first and foremost, it's about protecting that consumer, protecting the data, and of course it starts with ownership and control. And the way I likened it as, if you think of it this way, it really becomes really crystal clear. When let's forget about digital paychecks today, but 20, 30 years ago, when I received my paycheck on a monthly basis or every 2 weeks, and I took that check to the bank, and I handed that check to them. That was my money, but I asked them to hold on to it. They were the steward of that money, right? There was never any question. Well, maybe we've seen some New York banks with situations where they got maybe a little bit confused about whose money that was, but it was my money, and they were acting as the custodian for that currency. And the way we view the data is no different than that. It's the broker's data. We're just acting as a steward and a protector of that information, and because we have that vantage point, all of these things that we're talking about today really come into play very seriously for us, and something that we spend a lot of time focusing on. And so when you're looking at this specific area, understand what is the vendor that you're working with, what's their take on that? Do they view themselves as the steward? And if they do, what are the steps that they're taking? And who has access to the data within the brokerage? Who has access to it at the company that you're working with? And finally, it's really not an opt-out. You shouldn't have to say, well, no, I don't want you to do that. It should always be assumed that the answer is no, and then you have to opt into it. And so, that's a little bit of insight in terms of how we look at this first, and we think most critical component, because mindset says a lot about how you're going to act.
Well, and just to build on that, this is George. It's kind of bolded on the slide, and Glenn's talked about in his banking example is a great one, being custodians of that data. It's around this ownership and control. And when you're in, these 8 themes that we're going to talk about are very much aligned with how DocuSign runs its business and how we think about our customers. And, when you start from a premise of it's not our data, it's the customer's data, then it changes how you build product, how you secure product and data to make sure that everything we do reverts back to the benefit of the customer. So how do we make that data work as hard for that customer as possible, and something that they can benefit from, as opposed to something that we try to think about, and other than there are companies out there. There are a lot of companies out there who think, how can I as a company make money off of this data, as opposed to saying, how can I use the customer's data to help this customer be better? And that's actually probably an interesting segue to the next slide. It gets into a little bit of, certainly what we do at DocuSign within our transaction rooms, and maybe you want to talk a little bit more about oversight and compliance and how we use the data to help brokers in that front.
Yeah, and when you have that data in the system, it's one thing to have it captured, but the real power is when you start having the ability to kind of see what's happening. First of all, to make sure that everyone within the brokerage that the broker deems should have access automatically has access. So there's not this notion that an agent or a TC needs to remember to share with someone within the brokerage. Now, of course, outside of the brokerage, it's a different story. It's you have to determine who you want to share with. But within the brokerage, it's the ability to predefine who should see what. It's a matter of making sure that you have visibility at any point in time into what's happening in the transaction, what the price point is, what documents have been collected, what tasks have been completed, and then to ensure that there's a process enforced through the system. So, for example, a brokerage can define a set of tasks at each stage of a transaction, whether it's taking a new listing, getting an offer accepted, preparing for closing or closing, whatever those stages are defined, that they're able to be captured in the system, kind of enforced through the system, and then managed so that you have, as either a TC or an office manager or the broker, the ability to look at these things, sign off on, is the document complete, has the task been completed, and then either sign off and say, yes, that this has been done to a satisfactory manner, or to decline it, and then in a sense kick it back to the agent, kick it back to the TC so additional work can get done. And then make sure as every step goes through that there's a full audit log of what's happening, with what, by whom, so that it's captured within the system. And we think that, again, this is critical. We know that brokers without technology, it's really important to manage that compliance aspect. Now with the technology, the key is how do you get additional advantages of that and really take the oversight and compliance to a new level without slowing down the transaction, without burdening the folks involved with whether it's agents or transaction coordinators. And that's really kind of a key focus here.
Yeah, actually to that point, because I think that's one reason that we hear sometimes that people don't move to transaction management systems is they feel like it will actually make their business less efficient and not more efficient. Maybe you could just jump in on an example. I know you guys have implemented several of these with brokers. Of course, like anything, there's a learning curve, and that goes without saying. But do you see, and do brokers play back to you that once they get this in place, that it really does make their business more efficient, and do they feel more comfortable that they are in fact providing more oversight to their transactions?
Yeah, so this is George. I'll start with that, and then let Glenn jump in as well. So we actually had a customer come visit us recently, and they were talking to our account executive and our account management and our training organization. And I've started calling it the productivity trough, which is anytime you start anything new, you get a new phone, you get a new, you update your Microsoft, or anytime you get anything new, and our transaction room product is no exception to this. There's a learning curve where you're a little bit less productive in the beginning to get to more productivity. And we've implemented a bunch of things from a training, onboarding capacity perspective, and this is part of what this customer came and talked to us about. They're a big Southern California broker with 650 agents under them. That's just one example of our many. And they talked about how the training and the work that we did together helped them shorten that window of coming up to speed and getting on board, and that they are now, I think their number was 80% more productive for their brokerage. And that had a lot to do with that visibility and controls that they were able to set, and the way that they were able to personalize to what they did for their business.
Well, I think that's awesome.
The notion is of consistency as well is represented here, because what happens is that there becomes a consistent process, and the more it becomes consistent, the more people know what to expect within the brokerage of what's going to happen, how does the broker want the transaction to be managed through. And of course, it doesn't take away the personalization, it doesn't take away the interaction, but it brings consistency, and the more you have consistency, people understand it's a repeatable process and become better at that process. No different than someone who wants to who plays basketball that wants to be more efficient shooting free throws. You do it over and over and over again, and you have that same form. What we're trying to do within this is bring that consistency to the process so that everyone knows what to expect, when to expect it, and then as a result of that, people become naturally more productive.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think that's like anything. It takes a little bit of time, but it's good to hear that you have support or training to help them through that step, because that's where a lot of people get slowed down. They just give up. It's too much work, and they just stop. So that's awesome.
Yeah. So some of the maybe transitioning to the next slide here. Some of the greatest power. We talk about oversight and compliance. Integrating the data into other systems can be another giant productivity gain, time saver. I won't take Glenn's favorite phrase. I'll let him use his favorite phrase around about data integration. But it's something that, as many benefits as there are also some pitfalls to watch out for. So maybe Glenn, you want to say a little bit more about sort of how we view data integration and keeping that safe.
Well, that's good. I was worried you were going to steal my thunder there for a minute about anyone that's heard me on webinars or kind of speak talks about my campaign, and that is to save the pointer finger. And the whole point of that is anytime you're asking someone to touch a mouse pad, type a key, touch a screen on their phone or tablet, it's work, right? And the more work we're asking people to do, the less the adoption is going to be. And so the way we look at that is, how do we bring pieces together? And if you enter the data into your MLS, how do we take that listing data and bring it into the system? If you have data you're capturing throughout the transaction and it needs to get into accounting, how do we avoid pushing that, having someone rekey that information in? And so really it's about the integration, because again, we talk about the pros and cons of lots of things. We talked about the cloud. Well, one of the absolute key benefits of the cloud is the ability to bring pieces together using standards. And so there's now a really effective way to make sure that you're not trying to build everything, but you're using best-in-breed components for whether it's your accounting, your CRM, your transaction management, but making sure that they all talk together, work together, and you can make sure that information flows naturally. And what we look at is, like, anytime something, for example, goes from digital to paper, that's basically a brick wall, right? You're losing the value of the digital process. So for us, it's making sure not only it stays digital, but it stays integrated with the various systems that you use in your organization, so that we can make sure that, again, there's that efficient flow from the point you take a listing all the way through to the point that keys are handed over, and that's our objective.
So,
and Glenn, for the go ahead.
Sorry, Marilyn.
I was just going to ask, for the non-technical folks on the call, and even for the technical folks, can you explain what an API is and how you use them in this context?
That is a fantastic question. So API is basically a set of code that allows one system to talk to another one. And there's, everyone, a lot of people say, okay, is your API done? Well, an API is merely a collection of what we call calls. And it basically is instruction sets of, like, I need to pull this information from the transaction, or I need to add this person into a transaction, or I need to set the control on this particular document. So an API is, think of it as really a recipe book that talks about how two different systems that are separate can exchange data, can exchange documents, and can take action in each of those different systems. And so, again, an API isn't it never should be something that someone says, hey, we're done with. It's a living organism, and with every time you have something happen from one system going into another, the API is kind of the recipe for how that happens.
Got it. Thank you.
What I was going to build on that is, we talked a few moments ago about sort of data ownership and control, and so this integration is really a huge benefit and time saver for folks to sort of building on Glenn's, save the pointer finger so that people don't have to rekey data. It minimizes mistakes. At the same time, now all of a sudden, data is transferring from one software to another. And so one of the things that we really look for is making sure that the people we partner with adhere to the principles that Marilyn and her group came up with, and our xDTM standard, because once the data is goes from one software vendor to another, you want to make sure that there are controls in place and that your data still remains your data and is sequestered from other data, right? And so that's one of those protections and privacies that when we do agreements with other software vendors and when we're working with our customers, we want to make sure that the data is used to your benefit, but not in a place where all of a sudden your data can get into another vendor's hands and it sort of falls out of your control. And so that's one of the big things. And there are times where there's something, there's been a lot of talk after all the NSA about metadata, and there are values to metadata where sometimes that data is not personally identifiable to you or to your customer, where the aggregation of that data can give you helpful insights. My wife and I, we both don't know very much about our family histories, and so we joined 23andMe, which is sort of biggest data privacy risk of all. Like, this is your personal health information, and what they do is they can tell you without naming a person whether you're more likely or less likely to get a certain type of disease, or more vulnerable to this type of thing or that type of thing in a health history. So that's the metadata, where it's okay to share metadata as long as people can't tie that back to an individual company or case. And so understanding the difference between that and your data and making sure that your data remains sort of to your benefit, that's key when you're doing this data integration.
I just got a question from the audience. Maybe you guys can talk about it while we're on integration. They said, we have EPR software running on a Microsoft AX environment running in a private cloud in Germany. Can we integrate this with DocuSign storage? I don't know if that might be an offline question. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, we'd certainly be happy to answer that question. In fact, if someone would like to, they can email me directly. It's just Glenn, Glenn, @DocuSign.com.
Okay.
But again, that's the beautiful part, Marilyn, of an API is it allows disparate systems on disparate platforms anywhere in the world to be able to talk to one another. And as long as you have those recipes defined and people have them on both sides going in, there's a lot of wonderful connections that can be made.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
So maybe if we go to the next slide, we talk a little bit about we've talked about where the data goes and sort of how you control where the data goes. The ability to set permissions is another really critical consideration. So now we're talking about you're in the product. Can your technology vendor and employees at your technology vendor look at your data? That's one set of permissions. At DocuSign, everything's encrypted. We can't look inside the data or see what our customers have. It's all, everything's protected sort of in the server in an encrypted code until the two parties that have the link receive that and can then go in and unlock through that link. There's also a whole question of within your company, who can be invited into that system, who has the rights and access, and what level of controls do you have to set at an individual document level, at an individual user level. I used to work for Intuit, and we had QuickBooks was a big product of ours, and QuickBooks Enterprise is something where now all of a sudden, QuickBooks used to be for small businesses. There's one bookkeeper, they touch the product, but in Enterprise, all of a sudden, there's somebody in order entry, and there's somebody in the invoice department, there's somebody in HR and payroll, and you don't want the invoice person to be able to see the payroll data. You need to have those controls and access points. And one of the things that Glenn and his team built into our transaction room product is a very clear set of permissions and hierarchies that give you a tremendous amount of control over what permissions and access you set so that no buyer will ever see a seller document, no buyer's agent will ever see something that they're not supposed to see. If you bring in a mortgage broker or a title escrow officer into the transaction room, you can set those permissions within your brokerage as well as within your network to bring people into a transaction room to collaborate, but to know that you've got the permission setting to set who's allowed to see what.
And I think, one important aspect of that is just making it clear, bringing it to the forefront and having it very visible so there's no confusion. If you look at a particular document, you should be able to quickly see who has access and who doesn't. And the same with who's invited to a particular transaction room. And that's one of the things we work really hard to do is to make it very simple and very visual. So there's no need for explanation of does this person have access or do they not. And if they don't have access, or if they do and you can't remove it, why you can't remove it. And then the only other thing I would add here is, may not be a fun read, but I always recommend people, there's privacy policies for a reason. And they're always a great read because you can really get an understanding of the vendor's approach to your data by simply reading the privacy policy. And that's one of the things I always challenge folks to do is spend an hour or two and grab your products, your primary systems that you're using, grab their privacy policies and read them. And guess what? If you don't understand them or if you have questions, ask. Because this is so critical, again, with the data being digital now, and more importantly, the data's always been there, but now it's accessible. Now it's flowing all over the organization. It's flowing outside of the organization. And you're asking third-party tools to manage it on your behalf, not on your premises, but somewhere nebulously in this thing called the cloud. So to me, it's always an important starting point for people to become familiar with that privacy policy.
Well, and we talked to, you'll hear us talk about transparency a lot and being sort of straightforward, and a lot of that is also, making those policies readily available, trying to make them as straightforward and plain English as possible, trying to just be as upfront with customers about how and where data will be used, what their controls are, and making it as easy as possible for them. So you want to sort of be wary of companies that hide behind sort of legalese or try to make some of what their privacy policies and terms are confusing. Those are definitely folks you want to sort of watch out for.
So would it make sense if a broker's going to reach out to find one of these technologies, should they just ask the question and exactly the way you just said it, like, give me your privacy policy, not in legalese. I want to understand as clearly as you can articulate it where my data will go and will not go. Like, before you get even into a contract, just ask that specifically so it's not all buried in the gobbledygook of a privacy policy. Does that make sense for them to do that?
Yeah, I think fundamentally that is an important starting point, because not only is it important to understand yourself, but it puts a lot of insight, right? Because if the data is not yours, what are they going to do with it, right? And I mean, we live, right? I mean, so many models today are ad-based, and so is there the incentive to take that data and monetize it? Because the money's got to come from somewhere, right? And so it is a great practice, even before you get into the contract, to ask for it, to understand it, and to make sure if there's anything you're unclear of, to ask questions before the contract is signed.
I mean, it's really not very different than maybe not necessarily as many pages but as disclosure packets in real estate, right? You want people to be upfront and disclose what's happening in any sort of a real estate transaction. When you should hold your vendors and the people that you work with accountable to sort of a same set of standards that, in plain, straightforward English, they can tell you up front, how they operate their business and how they'll be treating your data.
So we got a question about privacy. It said, I am to sign a subscription with DocuSign on behalf of one of my clients based in the Netherlands, Europe, and want to know the location where our data is stored in the USA or outside, and who could have access specifically with regards to the former Patriot Act and similar U.S. legislation. There's a deep one for you.
We have a lot of global questions going on today. Very interesting. So, so DocuSign specifically has 3 data centers in North America. I don't know the 3 off the top of my head, but we actually have, and then we have 2 data centers in the EU, and we're opening up a 3rd data center in the European Union. One's in Frankfurt, one's in Paris, and I'm not sure where the 3rd one is. I think it's either Dublin or London. And so our intention, and by having these data centers in the different geographies, is number one for exactly that data compliance issue. The European Union has a different set of data privacy rules and data protection rules, specifically because of U.S. government intrusion and U.S. companies sort of being subpoenaed or sharing data. And so we've built those protections in for U.S.-based data and European data to have that sort of compliant around the world. It also benefits us from some of the other cloud benefits that we talked about in terms of backup, security, reliability, data redundancy, and there's the speed of the data delivery. So if you're in Europe, you don't want to wait for data to have to travel halfway around the world to get to you. It'll slow down your screen load time. So so we have those data centers in multiple locations for those reasons.
But just to be clear, the transaction data today is on one of the servers in the U.S. And we are going to be bringing that online in Europe as we make a major push later this year with these transaction systems into Europe. But today it is all on U.S. soil.
Well, so let's just to clarify that, we have we have multiple products as a company. The products that people most know us for is e-signature. That sort of those servers are as I described on the 2 different continents. The transaction room product, which Glenn was just referring to, that today we don't actually do a lot of global business on the transaction room product. That's coming, and so today those transaction room data is stored in the U.S. and will be eventually migrating over as we build out the European side of that business to those DocuSign company servers over there as well.
So definitely something, if you have a global business, which it sounds like this particular person does, and maybe others on the call do as well, another key question would be to ask, where are they housed? Are they global? Are they in Europe? Are they here? So another key one to for those that are on the call that are actually thinking about this, these are good questions for you to think about when you're talking to customer or potential new partners on this stuff. Okay.
Well, it's particularly just sort of the there are not very many companies that serve the real estate industry who have the sort of data sophistication and sort of global presence that a DocuSign has. So, it's all the more sort of important to vet other partners and vendors that you work with to make sure you're understanding sort of the level of sophistication. There's a handful of companies in this industry that sort of go to this degree of protection for data and their customers.
Gotcha.
Probably sort of talking about the lengths that we would go to, maybe we can move to the next slide. One of those links that we'll go to is we'll actually go to court for you and stand by our solution. So we've actually, I think, gone to court 3 times that I'm aware of as a company to stand by the integrity of our data and our customers and the legality of it. So out of millions and millions of transactions, we've had, I think, 3 challenges, and we've won them all. So that's a fraction of a percentage, but it's a nice thing to stand up and say we'll back you, and it's partly because we have this audit trail where we can track every document. Glenn built in a very exciting feature even for in-person signing that will track the GPS coordinates of where you were at the time that you did the signature and take a photo of yourself when you were signing. So lots of fun different ways that we can verify and certify that people are who they say they were and were where they were when they signed and when they were working in a transaction room.
Well, that's another thing that people should probably, when we hear pushback, not so much from people that are already in the using these kinds of things, but when they're concerned about, even though electronic signature was approved, I think it's 15 years ago in the U.S. now, at least, if not longer, there's still concerns from some brokers and from some of their customers about, oh, well, is it legally viable? I think the answer you just gave us tells us that, yes, it is. There's very few times when it gets challenged, but when it does get challenged, it does, in fact, hold up in court. So that objection kind of goes out the window for those that are still concerned. That's not really, has not been proven viable. And I don't even know how many, do you even know how many million signatures that maybe it's billions by now that you've put through your system. It's got to be, I don't know. It's got to be a big number. Kind of like McDonald's hamburgers, I would guess.
It is like, I don't know the number off the top of my head, but I know we're also tight on time here, so I kind of want to, I will say it's the 20th anniversary of the e-signature act. So this is actually the 20th year since Congress passed that. But speaking of legal considerations, also want to talk on the next slide a little bit about copyright protection. And there are a lot of documents and tools that folks use, and it's really important to us, particularly forms is obviously a huge part of transaction management and transaction rooms and what we do, and making sure that we're acquiring those forms with all of the legal copyrights and permissions so that you can use them knowing that you're protected from any sort of liability and how those forms get used, because various MLSs or associations are responsible for and own the copyrights to those forms. So that's another way in which we sort of always look to be above board and do things sort of the cleanest, best way on behalf of our customers. I don't know if you wanted to jump in, Glenn, with that.
Yeah, and that's, for example, when we partnered with Zip Forms, certainly a leader within the forms industry, and leadership in the industry starts with making sure that they've approached the MLSs and associations and brokerages the right way and obtained the right forms. And again, in the world of digital and software, which we live in, copyright's really important to us. And so for us, we want to be respectful of copyright in anything we deal with, not just forms. And so again, it's important to understand the challenges, but also to make sure that we are taking the appropriate steps, whether it's ourselves or through our partners like ZipLogic.
And I think we've touched on most of the points on the last slide, but I'll let Glenn jump in here on security and identity theft, which is our 8th and sort of, actually I think it's our 7th, so I think we've got one more after our 7th key consideration here.
And I think security, of course, everyone I think will shake their head and agree is really important. We've seen breaches at TJ Maxx, Home Depot, hotel chains, and so it's really important. Again, we talked about to start off this webinar that this is the time when people are really exposed in terms of their digital blueprint and their digital identity. And so every single person that touches that data has to be making sure they're focused on security and identity theft. And it even gets back to simple stories like, Tom Gonzer, who's the founder of DocuSign, actually had a transaction in the state of California, and the agent on the other side of the transaction of the property he was buying was using not using DocuSign, was using a competing product, and Tom said, "I'm not going to use that because it's not secure." The agent said, "Kibosh to that. You're just the founder of DocuSign, so of course everything's not right." And he said, "Well, fine. Send me the document." And he took a document and he changed the price from, let's say $1 million, and he put in $10. And he was able to actually change the document that was sent over through the system for signing that it was sent over in. And so it's really important to understand how is that secured, how is it protected, and how do you prevent those that you're simply asking to put their stamp on that they are agreeing to something from changing it. So and unfortunately, Tom didn't get the property for $10 as he tried to do, but at the end of the day, guess what? The other agent switched over and is using DocuSign for that very reason.
Gotcha.
So, for better or for worse, we don't live in a static world. The technology is moving at a blazing pace. I'm sure everybody on this call, some of the reasons that you joined the call was because you're trying to figure out how to keep up with technology, and it's not enough to put up like these principles and these considerations that we're talking about. It's not enough to sort of do this once and sort of set it and forget it. On password protection, security experts say, you should change your passwords on a regular basis. For software vendors, you want to constantly make sure that they're keeping pace with the latest changes and the newest developments. And so on the next slide, that's sort of our final sort of key consideration and something to think about is, are you working with a company that is making these continuous improvements in protection and support, that they are, this is the not sexy stuff that people don't love to do, and companies will often try to skirt around and don't necessarily have the resources to always put energy into improving and working on the things that are under the hood as opposed to the things that you can sort of see and feel. And so Glenn mentioned earlier he's joined the RESO board, so I'll let him talk a little bit more about that and kind of some of the things that he does with the product team to make sure that we're continually improving and protecting the data that you've got and that we are custodians of.
And so we're always trying to be very aware of what's happening around us in the industry. RESO has certainly grown up quite a bit in the last couple of years and is just doing some amazing things in terms of standardization for data and protection, and as well as we look beyond the real estate industry to see what's happening in the world of security in terms of biometrics, to see what's happening in terms of the world of infrastructure and performance. And so it's the key there is that, again, it's never a one and done. You're not finished with these things. And so, as George talked about, our job is to be very vigilant as to what's happening in the industry, outside of the industry, and it looks at security, it looks at what's happening with privacy, what's happening with APIs and integrations, and to continuously invest. And that's one of the things I'm very, very proud of. If you look at DocuSign as a company, is our ability to constantly invest in making sure that we're doing the right things with our products, making sure we're doing the right things with our infrastructure, making sure that we're on our own reevaluating our privacy policy and reviewing that on a regular basis to make sure it's meeting the needs of the industry. And I think that is, this to me is if you look at and talk to a company about the improvements that they're doing is a great indicator, because of course it's really easy when the sun is shining and things are happening today to have that great relationship, and you're buying a product that is as in a certain state as it is at the day you make the purchase or the day you start implementing. The key is, what does it look like 6 months, 18 months down the road? What changes have happened? And again, that's an area that, of course, as a product person, I'm very proud of the investments we continue to make as a company in being aware of what's happening in the industry, participating, and then bringing that back to our products, our services, our privacy policy, et cetera. And I think with that, we've kind of hit on the main topics, and we can move to the next slide and just talk about the conclusion here about, what are the key considerations that we should look at.
Yeah, so there's, yes, absolutely. So there's, I think we've, gotten a good view over an overview of them, and these are just kind of some words of advice from us. Just again, working with brokers on trying to, if I were you guys, anybody that's on the call that's going to be looking for solutions like this, I would use these key considerations. We're going to actually be publishing a document the next couple of weeks on this that might give you even a more specific guide on that. But these are the kinds of things that you really want to ask for. Of course, there's always ease of use and that type of regular product selection criteria that you would add to this. But in terms of when you're talking about transactions and protecting data and protecting copyright and things like that, you kind of have to go deeper than you normally would when you're choosing other types of marketing technology. So we thought this might help you. And here's some of the specific questions you can ask them. Do you resell customer data in any format for any reason? Most people, if they find that out, would say absolutely not. I respect the integrity of my transaction with my client and the privacy of our relationship and would never do that. But if you hear that they are, then that's a red flag for you. Does anyone in your company, other than the agents that are directly involved and the people that have oversight, have access to this data? And if so, what do they do with it? Does your company do background checks on those that have access to it? So, you hear horror stories sometimes in technology. Some of the big hacks that we've heard from Target and people like that, where sometimes that's an inside job, so to speak, and we want to protect you against that. How long does your company store it? Where does it store it? You heard the conversation earlier about which continent do they store it on. How often does the data get purged? All kinds of things. And then if the data gets integrated with someone else, does it remain protected, or are all bets off once it gets passed through? There's a lot of different kinds of things like that to ask. So we would love to help you guys just stay in tune with all of that, because these are important questions that you're really acting as an agent of safety and security for everybody involved in the process. So you got to ask the tough questions. So let me get into that a little bit. I got one that said, another quote, foreign question. Since January 1st, 2016, a data leak law has come into effect. How will DocuSign inform us when a data breach has occurred? There's some smart people on this webinar. They're knowing a lot about this stuff.
These are definitely very savvy questions. So we have something
Absolutely.
called the DocuSign Trust Center, which is up 24/7, and we can get you we can get Marilyn the URL for that. Although you should be able to just Google it and come up to the Trust Center.
It's just trust.docusign.com.
Trust.docusign.com. And so that's one of the places where we keep 24/7 instant sort of updates of how the product is tracking, any security breaches, anything that's going on there. I'm not 100%. I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not 100% familiar with all the legal obligations and compliance requirements of the particular law this person talked about. But I'm sure as a company we will any proactive communications or alerts that need to go out. I'm sure we will. Go sort of above and beyond kind of what's required. And like I said, for sure, everything is on the Trust Center.
Yeah,
gotcha.
We do have alerts and updates that we do put on the Trust Center. And quite frankly, it is just amazing to me. Again, Marilyn mentioned earlier, I came from a startup called Cardivi that I'd founded, and to have at our fingertips and as part of DocuSign in a ridiculously talented security team that is aware of what's happening. A couple years ago, there was a security situation out there that was going through the internet, and literally within, before it was even known kind of and brought up in the news and such, we had already had the security team reach out, said, okay, we need to look at these things, and took any corrective actions. And so, that's one of the benefits. And DocuSign has a large and talented and growing team that does nothing but look at security, look at our servers, look for breaches. We are, one of the things we're doing right now, for example, with the transaction rooms products, we've got a third party doing external penetration tests, and that's a regular thing that we do so that we are aware of what, is it possible to breach, and every time you do that, you're learning new things, and the industry has learned new things, and you're trying to apply those before something nefarious or bad could happen.
Gotcha. We also just, Melissa from your team just sent over another location where you can actually look up at DocuSign.com how-it-works/legality to learn more about some of the rules that someone on the call is obviously already up to date on. Question for you, let me jump over here for 1 second we got a lot of good ones coming in here. Where is it? Can we use our own templates for listings, lease agreements, deposit escrow orders, et cetera, and I understand that these will be protected regards to copyright as well?
Yeah, so if they're your forms and templates, you can put them into, you can set them up as templates within our e-signature product and, pre-tag where they need to get signed and dated and initialed and all those different steps. But again, that's one of the things is, if it's your form, you certainly have the opportunity to set up those templates within our e-signature product.
Gotcha. Here's one on a different path. I'm back to integration. Can you explain how MLS data integration works?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So one of the things that we're working on now is you'll see an announcement here, shortly in the next couple of weeks. Is that fair, George? Mm-hmm. But we're working on being able to. So today, when you create a transaction room within the transaction rooms product, you basically have to type in the address and upload a photo and such. And what we're doing is we'll be adding an opportunity. So again, this will be coming very shortly. So you actually say, instead of typing the information in, you want to create a transaction room, you can say you can want to create it from a particular place, and you simply enter the ID, and then we'll bring that data from the MLS into the transaction room. So that, again, we've eliminated the keystrokes. You'll be able to change the data and update it if need be, but the foundation of what's created will be anything you've already entered into that listing service will be in the transaction rooms product. And kind of taking away or alongside that, one of the things we're going to be releasing here in a couple weeks is today within transaction rooms, every single brokerage has the same data captured on transactions, and we're putting the finishing touches and testing on the ability for every brokerage to customize what transaction data they want to capture. Now, it doesn't mean every transaction has different data, but every single brokerage is going to have the ability to set and define the transaction data beyond, of course, a couple of fields that we're going to require as a company, but you'll have greater control over the data elements for your transactions, and that will help things like making sure we're bringing the right MLS feed in, making sure we're sending the right data to the to your accounting system, for example. So really excited, and a lot of work and investment is being made right now into the product to support that data flow. Gotcha.
Here's a question. Is it possible to integrate DocuSign with if we have an encrypted email system so that anytime something is in the email, it automatically gets pushed into DocuSign?
I guess the question would be, again, feel free to reach out to me directly with that question, but it depends on what you want to do with that email. If it's, for example, within the transaction rooms product today, we have the ability to take and get documents and even emails added to the system by simply emailing them into an individual's inbox. So if it's coming from an email system, whether it's encrypted or not, there should be the opportunity to take it and get it added to the inbox. But again, it really depends on what the objective is, with that email and what you want to do with it and where you want to send it. But, certainly possibility. I'd have to learn a little bit more.
So gotcha. I just want to, I know we're running out of time here, so I just want to sort of leave 3 thoughts for everybody, and appreciate everybody joining the call, and appreciate Marilyn and the RE Technology team for inviting us to speak today, and really encourage everybody to focus on the benefits of, and so hopefully we didn't scare too many people here about what sort of the dangers are out there, because the benefits to your business to going digital are tremendous. The efficiency, compliance, consumer satisfaction you can find, there's no substitute for it. So number 1 takeaway from today, we hope, is that you go find new technology, certainly our technology, but work with partners to take your business digital. And then look for transparency is the second thought with those partners. And finally, these 8 principles that Marilyn and the RE Technology team have come up with are a little bit of investment and a little bit of homework up front. It's not a ton of work to go ask these questions that the RA Tech team has come up with, that will save you a lot of pain in the future and really allow you to focus on achieving the benefits of taking your business digital, as opposed to worrying about headaches or risks that can come along with that.
Absolutely, and just to underline that from back to the broker reality, as brokers roll these kinds of programs out and get the traction that they need, even the most tech-averse agents, and I'm sure all of you on the call know who I mean when I say that, once they get involved with the system, I just believe it's a godsend. It's not only a great potential recruiting tool, it's a great retention tool, because once they get comfortable transacting business like this, there's really no going back. So we've seen it work with the top producer that sells 200 houses a year, as well as the one that part-timer that does it just a couple of times a year. So these are great systems. Every broker in America needs to have one of these. It's just time for protection, for efficiency, and let's just underline and leave it with one other thing. When we do consumer research with talking about these types of systems across the country, this is clearly a way to provide better service and to create stronger relationships with customers, and at the end of the day, really, that's what we're all here to do, right? So with that, I will leave you guys. Thank you, everyone, for your attendance. We really appreciate it, and we will send a lot of the follow-up notes. You had a lot of good questions today about different types of information. We'll add links to all of that in our thank you note. There will also be a recording of this sent to all of you, so you can share it with others. And here's the contact information if you have any more specific follow-ups. Sales at DocuSign, I'm sure they'll be happy to help you out with that. And Glenn had left his email earlier if you had some specific questions about the transaction management portion of the DocuSign suite. That would be awesome. So everybody have a wonderful day, and if you have any further questions, you can always give us a call too at Marilyn at Wave Group, and we'll be happy to help you out. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you.